everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon and welcome to the first session of In Poverty, the Lunch and Learn series, hosted by United Way Young Leaders. Thanks for zooming in with us. We're so glad that you're here today. My name is Samantha Ashby, and I serve as chair of United Way Young Leaders. I've been involved with United Way for about 5 years, and I'm so proud of the work they do to end poverty in Greensboro. Before I introduce today's speaker, I would like to offer a special thanks to the Young Leaders Cabinet for planning this engaging and informative series. And if you haven't had a chance to RSVP for the June 11th and June 18th sessions of this 3-part series, then please be sure to do so at unitedwaygso.org/learn. Kim Gatling and Marcus Thomas will be the featured speakers for the 2nd and 3rd sessions of the series, and they will be sure to leave you with some ideas and action items to consider. I'd also like to thank our sponsors of the series. Thank you to our gold sponsor, P&G. And thank you to our bronze sponsors, an anonymous donor, Cone Health, and Contours Emerging Leaders Group. And also thank you to our friend sponsor, Lincoln Financial Group. And thank you, okay. Today's featured speaker is Michelle Gethers-Clark. She is the president and CEO of United Way of Greater Greensboro. Michelle's talk is titled, What's Poverty in Greensboro? Myths, Facts, and Action. We know that you'll learn something new today. And as you have questions, you can go to the chat box and Michelle will address as many of those as she can after she's done with her presentation. And please join me in welcoming Michelle, and you can take it away.
Yes. Thank you, Samantha. In our nation, we are brought together at a special moment right now, not just because of COVID-19, but also because 8 minutes and 46 seconds happened. And there's a heightened sensitivity now. Although millions of seconds have passed since the tragic 8 minutes and 46 seconds on the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota. This United Way has been engaged in the work that is now coming full circle for our nation. It has become the topic of discussion. So you as listeners today, the cabinet of young leaders, you have already been immersed in this work. And so 8 minutes and 46 seconds is a negative defining moment for our nation, but it is a moment of empowerment for all of us that are on this call today. So I thank you very much for being here. Next slide, please. And so the reality is that the American dream is broken. And it is broken for some, and it has been broken for quite some time. Some would say that it's been broken for centuries. Some would say it's broken for decades. And the idea that George Floyd has awakened the nation, and in many cases, the world, around the fact that the American dream is broken for some. What this graph of our great country depicts is children who are born into the bottom 5th of the income scale. What is their probability that they will move to the top income scale? In the red area on the map, you will see that it means that a child born to a parent who is living in poverty will never leave poverty. It is the area where there's a 0% chance, zero, that you will be upwardly mobile financially based upon who you were born to and where you were born. So I submit to you that we must pay attention. not for the legacy of any one person, but for the survival of our nation and for our own legacies that we will create for our children, nieces, nephews, grandchildren, neighbors, and our brothers and our sisters. Next slide, please. So let's kind of dissect this a little bit more. Next slide. So why do people live in poverty? I would like 3 people to raise their hand and tell me why people live in poverty. So if you could please raise your hand and take yourself off mute and tell me why people live in poverty. Okay, Jim, tell me why people live in poverty.
This Jim, Michelle?
Yes, that Jim. You, Jim.
I think a fundamental reason that folks live in poverty is not having the skills and opportunities to do otherwise.
Mm-hmm. So skills. 2 more people. Cherie Charles. Why do people live in poverty? There's no wrong answer. Take yourself off mute.
Hello?
Yes.
Yes, I think people live in poverty is because they weren't given the chances at a good life, and not necessarily saying that their parents didn't know any better, but if they knew better, then they would do better, and they would be able to teach their kids the things that they weren't taught growing up, as far as like going to college and things like that. So it's like the more that you know, the better your advances are of getting out of poverty and making your life better in general.
Agree. Okay, and the last person I'm going to call on is Alana Allen.
Hello.
Hello.
I would say mostly generational.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes if your grandmother, she lived in poverty. So some people just pretty much stay on that path. So it could be generational.
That's exactly right. But here's what society would have us believe: that people are lazy, they're criminal, they're high school dropouts, they have babies out of wedlock, they're substance abusers, they refuse to work, they're dependent, they're bad work ethics, they have difficulty learning new things, they have an unstable family life, they're not trustworthy, they lack ambition, they have literacy issues, and they're entitled. That's what the headlines have read in our great nation for decades and decades and decades. And it is also the whisper that we sometimes hear when we are engaged with our neighbors and friends. Next slide, please. So what I'd like for us to see are the facts. The minimum wage in North Carolina is $7.25 and has been $7.25 since 2008. I would like for you to come off mute and tell me, what thing did you buy in 2008 that did not change in price or volume for the last 12 years? It did not change. And I've got a gift for you if you can name something that price did not change. Oh, it looks like I'm not going to give away my gift, because the reality is nothing has stayed at the price it was since 2008. And so what we have here is we've looked deeply at what self-sufficiency means and when is a person self-sufficient. And by definition, a person is self-sufficient when they can meet their own basic needs without governmental assistance or assistance from a private source, call your mother and father, or borrowing, etc. And what we find here is that one adult who is making less than $10.74 an hour cannot be self-sufficient. They do not have enough money to meet their basic needs. And we'll talk about that on the next slide. You can see if you are a single parent and your child is not school age and you've got to pay for childcare, you need to make $20 an hour. And if you're making less than that, you cannot meet your basic needs and your child's. And if you are a single head of household with 2 children, you need to make $25 an hour. And if you make less than that, you cannot meet your own basic needs and that of your children who require full-time childcare during the day while you work, and the child who is school age also requires after-school care and summer care. And last and certainly not least on this slide is 2 adults. So 2 adults with 2 kids. If each adult in the household makes less than $14.35, they cannot meet the basic needs of their 2 children or themselves. We hired the University of Washington, and they model 700 family types. So this is not about Michelle in the United Way or Samantha and the Young Leaders Council. These are hard, cold facts. I am not advocating for a different minimum wage. What I am advocating for is higher wages based upon your contribution, just like all of us on this phone. Next slide, please. So let's peel back the onion a little bit. Let's kind of unpack this. We're going to stay in the 1 adult column. If you're an adult, your average rent is $750, $50. And that doesn't mean that it's the Taj Mahal. This is fair market value, decent. Raise your hand if you think rent in reality is a little bit more. Right, I see some hands go up. Do you think rent is actually less than that for 1 adult? So what we know is this is realistic. It also suggests that to food for a person, breakfast, lunch, and dinner, they do not go out. They do not go to Chick-fil-A or anything like that. And the cost of transportation, we assume in this model that transportation, because Greensboro, North Carolina has a limited public transportation system, that the person is actually riding, has a car and insurance, but this model does not take into account that they have to purchase the car and that they might have a car note. This is just your basic transportation and maintenance. Healthcare costs, you see that there's miscellaneous because you do have to buy a pair of shoes once in a while. You have to buy some toothpaste and a toothbrush. So those are the kinds of things that are in miscellaneous. And you get down to the fact that to afford just those things, you've got to make $10.74. And did I mention that that equates to $22,000? And did I mention that every adult experiences an emergency one day or another? And sometimes the emergency is as simple as you got a blowout on your tire and you need a new tire, or you're not feeling well and you need some over-the-counter items. So that is how we have unpacked this, and I know that this presentation will be available to all of you so that you can see what is going on in our community. Go to the previous slide, please. So if you make $7.25, you can see the burden that exists and why $10.74 has to be the North Star. So we are not advocating for a $10.74 minimum wage. We are advocating for people to get the skills necessary to increase their income. Next slide, please. And then, yes, thank you. So let's unpack this a little bit further, and let's just look at it from a percentage standpoint, because I gave you the absolute numbers. Now I would like for us to see that if you are a single adult, 40% of your expenses is housing. And if you take housing and food, which are just basic necessities, Maslow's hierarchy of need, that represents 53% of your expenses if you are making $10.74 an hour. which means if you're making $7.25 an hour, you cannot pay your rent and buy food. It cannot be done. And you can see the transportation cost is 15%. You can see that the healthcare costs are 9%. And you have to pay taxes on your income. So you can get a feel for when you unpack this. Let's jump over to 2 adults with 2 children. The cost of childcare and housing and food alone, 60% almost, or exactly. 60%. You have not gone to work yet. You have not gone to a doctor's visit, which we all know you need to do with young children. Before 60% of your $14.35 that each adult makes is gone. So there is a burden that exists in our community for the generationally people identified as living in poverty. This also represents and debunks some of those myths we started with about being lazy and not going to work. I want to share with you that 70% of the people who receive food stamps in Guilford County actually go to work. But their wages are too low. And now you can see from the facts, nothing but the facts, no opinion. Michelle's opinion is not allowed today. Samantha told me to keep my opinion out of this. She didn't really. But it is to say the only way that we can be empowered is when we have the facts. Next slide, please. So further, let's look at another set of facts. And that set of facts is, remember, in this family type, this is 1 adult with 2 children. And those children, one is a preschooler, needs full-time daycare. And remember, this person, to get to $53,000, actually needs to make $25 an hour. Well, if you make more than $9,500 in this family type, you can no longer get welfare. The federal poverty line says, hey, if you make more than $21,000, you're good. You're good as gold. You don't need any help. But you can see self-sufficiency and the poverty guideline is a steep curve to get there, and it's a steep cliff to fall off of. So let's just assume this person does work full-time, but they only have a minimum wage job. The government suggests that if you are working full-time, you are not in poverty, but we both know, we all know, that you are absolutely in poverty, and not by my opinion, but by the facts, by the data that is in front of you. We also know that what we do in our nation is we categorize how low your income is. And so we say that someone who makes $30,000 simply has a lower living standard. No, they don't have a lower living standard. They cannot survive. And if you are associated with the Housing and Urban Development Organization, which is public housing, vouchers, and the like, they have segmented people into extremely low income, very low income, and just low income. And once you're at $55,000 for this family type, then you're off their scale, because they are trying to understand the degrees of low income. But imagine that this family would not be allowed to move into an extremely low income development simply because they literally made $23,000, which we all know is not enough. They would be just making too much to afford. So some people are saying right now, all those lazy people are staying home and collecting that unemployment instead of going to work. And those people who are collecting that unemployment instead of going to work, here's what they're saying to themselves. I worked all day, every day for $21,982, full-time minimum wage. I'm getting more than that staying home. And because when you're living in poverty, you can't always see the future. You can't always see how that unemployment is going to run out. And then what? But this gives you some idea about why that rumor mill exists. And it's not a rumor mill, it's probably factual. But there's a reason why people are not doing well in Greensboro, North Carolina, and now you have the facts. Next slide, please. So we asked the consultants to model the top 10 jobs in the state of North Carolina. So where do people work? What are the most populated jobs? Well, here are the top 10 most populated jobs in our state. And we're going to talk about the single person who has 2 children. And remember, we said that she needs to make, or they need to make, $25.42 an hour in order to meet all of the needs of themselves and their children. Please tell me, by putting up a number of fingers, how many jobs of the top 10 jobs allows this person to make a self-sufficiency wage? Put up your fingers. So out of the 10 most populated jobs, 1 pays a self-sufficiency wage. And if anybody on this phone is a registered nurse, they know, and many of us who are not registered nurses know what it actually takes to become a registered nurse and the complexity of becoming a registered nurse. So what I would say, you know what, let me just, the head of the hospital is calling me and I just need to tell him I can't talk. I called him and now he's calling me back. But what I would say to us is when we see that cashier and what we've learned through coronavirus. So here's what we've learned. The people at the bottom of the pay scale are actually keeping our country functioning. Look at this list, ladies and gentlemen. Look at it. They are keeping the country functioning. And often we exclude them from the opportunity to do more. We exclude them because generationally they grew up in the wrong zip code. We exclude them because they did have a learning difference in the classroom and they acted up a little bit with the teacher. But our community is surviving because of people who are making the least amount of money. So what I want you to extract from this is you could go to work all day at a customer service job and not be able to meet your basic needs. And in fact, if you were a minimum wage worker, you need to work 2.5 minimum wage jobs in order to meet your basic needs. This is why people live in poverty, the facts, and not the myth. Next slide, please. Where do teachers fall in this chart? Thank you, Jim. Jim, we are dissecting the data for teachers. Believe it or not, teachers are not the one of the top 10 jobs, but teachers obviously are not at the top. Teachers are going to fall somewhere in between the median wage of all occupations. They're going to be above that, but they are not going to be as self-sufficiency with this family type. And the reality is when we look at those occupations, there is a bonus paid to teachers, but teachers' starting pay can be something in the neighborhood of $35,000 to $40,000. And then they get these kicker bonuses. But there are many who do not get, who are making under $40,000 and going and dealing with our sweet babies all day, every day, because we all know we have sweet children who never do anything wrong and never talk back. So that's where teachers are. So they're going to be above the median, but they're not going to be all of them at $53,000, which in this case represents the nurse. If you look at the next slide is telling us that self-sufficiency across the entire state of North Carolina is color-coded here. And for those of you who've lived anywhere outside of Guilford, you can probably see what your wage can buy or what your money can buy. And I have often thought about, what can my money buy? I always think about housing, having grown up in New York City, where I could have never afforded a house that was new. So when we got to the Greensboro, I said, oh, we're going to get us a new house, because that is a pipe dream in New York. So I want you to imagine that the lowest, and it's not a standard of living and it's not a cost of living, it is simply the self-sufficiency standard, is in Person County, where if you were an adult with one preschooler and you made $30,000, you could make it. You can meet your own basic needs. However, if you are in Wake County and you are a single adult with one preschooler who needs childcare all day, you have to make $54,000 a year in order to afford the rent, the childcare, the food, the transportation, and all the other things that come around that. So this is just at a glance what self-sufficiency looks like, color-coded in the state of North Carolina. Next slide, please. Lauren, I'm assuming you're managing chat, because I happened to see Jim's when it popped up. Because I'm not good at doing more than one thing at a time.
I've got the chat, don't worry about it.
Thank you, sister. Then here, I would love for you to see the movement of self-sufficiency. So over the last 24 years, how much has the self-sufficiency standard moved? The self-sufficiency standard, as you can see, unless the smallest change you can see in Rowan, and then you can see the largest change in Mecklenburg, where the change between what the number was in 1996 to what it is now is between 122 and 161% increase. And people who live in Mecklenburg, some of them would say that. I see Frank McCain on the line. Frank, is that true? Do you believe that it has changed that much? You're on mute. Or maybe you're gone. But if anybody has any experience in Mecklenburg or Wake, you can speak to this cost escalation. And then you can see in Guilford, our change over this period of time has been 100 to 118%. So in fact, nothing has stayed the same in price. Next slide, please. Yes, so someone said, yep, that's true in Wake County. Thank you. So let's zoom out a little bit and see what's going on around the nation. So we went ahead and zoomed out. We asked the consultants to zoom out a little bit because we don't want to just look at ourselves in isolation, because people generally migrate. People move up and down and across our country. So if you go to Greenville, if you are an adult with 2 children and you make $19.81, you can actually take care of yourself. But in Greensboro, you need 25. If you are in Chattanooga, you need 22. If you're in South Florida, you need, or mid-Florida, you need 25. But if you go up north and you go to New Jersey, you need 30. If you go across the country and go to Salt Lake, you need $23 an hour. And if you go further west to Spokane, you need $24 an hour. So we can see this idea of self-sufficiency, it does change, and people do have to move sometimes in order to get ahead. Next slide, please. So Michelle, thank you very much for all that doom and gloom. What are we going to do from here? The reality is in Guilford County, the poverty rate is 31% higher than the national average, and we actually find that unacceptable on the United Way team. There are 27 of us who come to work every day marching to the drummer's beat to stop the madness, that it is not okay for 57,000 people to live in poverty. 16,000 of the 57,000 are children. And we already know the statistic in Greensboro that if you're born to a parent in poverty, there is nothing that you can structurally do to get out of poverty, which is the most ludicrous thing in the world. And that's why the American dream is broken for some. And it is beyond the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that we all observed globally as someone's life was taken from them. The millions of seconds and minutes that preceded that and now come is our call to action. We must do something to ensure there is more equity, there is more justice, and there is more economic mobility for everyone. And so we believe that helping people starts before they're born and it lasts with them until they're seniors. We also believe that it is anchored in 4 root causes of poverty. We believe when your basic needs are not met, it is very difficult for you to focus on getting a better job. So we've got to make sure food, shelter, water is available. We also know that education doesn't begin at kindergarten and it doesn't end at 12th grade. So we've got to be invested in what education looks like and skill building. Education begins in the womb. And it goes until, I won't say the way it stops, but we should all be lifelong learners. So we know that basic needs, education. We also believe that sick children do not go to school and sick adults do not go to work. So we have to pay attention to health. And I am not talking about health care. I'm not talking about insurance. I'm talking about health and wellness. I see Terry on the line, and she is all about what you put in your body. Helping us to really think about how our body is capable of being healthy through yoga and other things. So what I would say is this is about well-being. And we've come to know it as health care, but it is about well-being. I would also say, so that's number 3. And last and certainly not least is the only way out of poverty is through meaningful work. You have to go to work to leave poverty. You cannot leave poverty if you do not work. That is just a cold, hard fact. And I pray that we open our hearts to giving people who may not look like us and do not come from our background the chance to work. And those are the 4 anchors. We invest them in the continuum of strategic partners, innovative services, and innovation. Integrated services and innovation. It's how we make those investments. Most recently, we granted $5,033,000 to the community. Those nonprofits got notified over the last several days. And starting on July 1st, we will start to disperse the $5 million to them so that they can do this work to address the root causes of poverty. Next slide, please. One of the things that we've got to do is I want everyone to find themselves on this chart. Because what we constantly are doing is gathering assets. So I want you to find yourself. And then I want 5 of you to tell me where you are on this chart. So I want you to unmute yourself and tell me where you are on this chart. So I heard from a couple of people before. I want to hear from some new voices because there are 41 of you. So let me hear from 5 new voices. Where are you on this chart? Terry, thank you for volunteering. Unmute. Okay.
Did you mean me? Terry
Yes.
Mallory?
Oh, yes. Pretty you.
I will say that I'd like to be a community health expert, but I am not an expert. I am involved in the faith community, and I'm a former K-12 educator, and I serve in community organizations like the UNCG Foundation Board. So I want to look for where I am in a lot of these places and creating opportunities for relationships. I think when people have relationships, they are ready to support the 4 parts you see as integral and really fundamental to generate change.
Excellent. Omega Galloway, where are you on this chart of assets? Terry shows up in several places. Where do you show up as an asset in your community? And Stella, make sure you get ready because you're next. If you're on mute, unmute yourself because we can't hear you.
Some great responses in the chat as well. We have folks from workforce development, Guilford County, nonprofit human services. Thanks to everybody responding in the chat.
Thank you. So I guess I got my 5. I guess you're off the hook, Omega. Stella, you want to say something?
Not in particular, but I'm from the library, the city of Greensboro.
Good.
Okay.
Good. So the reality is you are helping us in government services. So that's where you show up as an asset. City and county government services, you show up. So what I'm trying to say to everybody is you are an asset. You are not a liability to our community. By virtue of you being even interested in coming to hear what has been put together by the young leaders of the community, it tells me that you're a living, breathing asset that wants to participate in solutions. Oh, I keep trying to move my slide forward. Next slide. So what we did is we actually accumulated some assets. And COVID-19 is not going to beat us as assets. We all band together, $2.1 million went out to 97 nonprofits who are serving thousands of people with those basic needs that I just shared with you. One of the grantees is on the phone. Tabitha, what were you able to do as a result of receiving that grant? Just tell us one thing you were able to do. Come off mute. If you're talking, you're on mute.
While she's looking for the mute button, this is Curtis. I have a question. I work for Lincoln Financial to answer your question on the prior slide.
Thank you.
This $2.2 million, where did it come from?
It actually came from people like you and your corporations. Individuals gave us the money, and also corporations gave us the money. Some foundations gave us money. And I want to say that United Way has been a good steward over the last 98 years. And we had set aside a little bit of money in order to invest in a community emergency. So we were able to also put in money. So it really became the true assets of the community that went forward to help the community.
Gotcha. That's great. Thank you.
Yep. Okay, I'm gonna move us forward. Tabitha, I see you're trying to talk, but we can't hear you. So what we are doing now is the United Way is in the middle of its 2025 strategic plan. So what we're trying to do is organize and focus resources and assets and tag your it. So if you want to know what is it that I can do to get involved to address the root causes of poverty, we need help. We, for the first time in our 98-year history, are actually doing a large, quote unquote, community strategic planning effort, where we are going to incorporate the voice of community and the hands and feet of the community. We can't hear you. Raise your hand if you can hear me. Okay. So if you look in the chat box, Lauren, some people are saying they can't hear.
I think folks are responding that they couldn't hear Tabitha, but I think everyone can hear you fine, Michelle.
Okay, thank you,
You're
Lauren.
welcome.
So what I would say is, I need some of you. And what I'd love for you to do is send a note to Lauren and Samantha and let them know how you would like to be engaged and that you would like to bring your assets to the table. No pun on words. Oh, Lauren is saying email her. So she put her email in the chat box. Next slide. And so with that, I want you to move beyond COVID-19 relief, to move into what do we want to recover and be as people. There are some things I learned working from home and isolation that I never want to forget, and I've documented them. We also must re-engage. We can't live in our houses forever. We can't crawl under a rock. How are you going to re-engage? And then last and certainly not least, how are we going to rethink the status quo? The status quo is causing for example, during COVID, 40% of the deaths are African-American people, although they are not 40% of the population. And we've got to rebuild something better than existed before we went into relief mode. The reality is, if I applied this to your life, if you had the opportunity where there was no incremental cost and lightning struck the shed in your backyard, would you build that shed exactly the way it was before the lightning struck? Or would you redesign, remodel, and rethink it so that you could rebuild something better? And we all know the answer: you would build something better. So I ask you today to help us, help this community, help the babies, help their parents feel like they are worthy of us rebuilding something that's even better than it was before. So with that, I'm gonna take questions that you might have for me.
This is Lauren, everyone. I also want to uplift what Tabitha wrote in the chat because her audio isn't connecting. Because of the grant she received, they were able to pay for a lot of things: utility payments, support for deaf individuals with food, preventing job loss. They also helped save a deaf individual from losing her housing due to COVID, aid with health and wellness, and they're currently assisting with job searches and care packages that include basic necessities.
Thank you for being an asset to our community, Tabitha.
It looks like there was a question from Christine earlier. Has United Way gathered any statistics on how families without internet access and technology are managing now that education has shifted to online learning?
Well, here's what I can tell you. The school system has 72,000 children. 6,000 children did not sign on immediately and did not sign on in the first 30 days. They have now gotten that number down to somewhere between 4,000 and 2,000. We all know why those babies did not connect. But, and this is now personal, there is more Wi-Fi and more fiber in my neighborhood than any one person could ever need. We actually don't have the same internet fiber laid in every community in Greensboro. Some communities do not have Wi-Fi, high-speed internet availability in this great country in 2020. And nobody's talking about it. I talk about it every chance I get. So thank you very much for giving me an opportunity to talk about it. We have got to hold people accountable. It's unacceptable. So what some of them did is they said to take the heat off of themselves, they had conversations about, we'll give you free internet. Well, free internet doesn't do you any good if you don't own the house. You can't get the fiber laid. So we have to be careful of the propaganda versus the reality. So my yardstick is what the school system was able to turn on for children. So 100% of children are not connected. We also know a large percentage of children, not a large percentage, a meaningful percentage of children are actually homeless. So that factors in also, obviously.
It also looks like Jim asked a question about sharing latest updates from the Family Success Centers.
Yes. So I don't have them with me, but here's what I will say to you. We had to pause a number of the human services interactions for obvious reasons. And we are starting them back up. So people are back into job search, back into their GED classes and the like. But unfortunately, we had to pause because all of that activity was not social distance and it was direct human engagement. So most human services in our nation stopped and went online. So we are online, but again, I just shared with you what the challenges are with online. Other questions?
This is Curtis again. On that point with education, I hear that. My wife and I have talked about that a lot. When our kids, I have 4 young kids, and when COVID came, not only do we have internet access, but we just went out and bought a couple cheap laptops for them because we could do that, no skin off my back. And so that made it all easy around here. Is there, for somebody who's not sitting in a policymaking kind of role or anything like that, and kind of hears that pain, is there a practical way to help? I imagine it's a big uphill battle, even bigger than usual as the new school year starts for a lot of kids.
So as a practical matter, hot spots do work. But they work for us, so they're going to work. Because none of us are digging and burying lines. Let's get real. So we got to think about, but what we've also done is we haven't put enterprises in some of these communities. But what we've got to think is about community-based hotspots. So we have to think about, I'm not being negative. I know somebody's on from the library, but you can't go on a computer in the library for more than an hour. And it's a capacity issue. It's not a mean issue. It's a capacity issue. If you're sitting on the computer for 6 hours, then that means somebody else can't get on it. So how do we leverage our community assets for greater good while we fix some of these structural things, right? Because the reason why there's no wire in certain neighborhoods is because it's redlining and it's because it's a low-income community. Let's call it what it is. It's racist. It's inequity. Then, yeah, someone said it's called redlining. That's right. So what if we put hotspots? And when I was in Ethiopia with my daughter, there were some businesses that's what they did. They were hotspots for the community. So those are some of the things that we've got to get creative about until we can fix the structural issues, which are going to take a little bit more time, but it doesn't have to take forever. Curtis is one idea.
It looks like Cindy had also asked a question. What happens to young adults who age out of foster care in households that are below the poverty level?
Those children are in the streets and they are adding to this number. Many of them wind up being incarcerated, but it is possible for them to make it out. So they have to figure it out, to be perfectly honest with you. Some of them go to school. I hope that you know that there are children in college who are in poverty, who actually don't have any place to live when they are not in school. So there are a lot of realities, and these children are trying to make it. Curtis, I'm sorry you missed the first 15 minutes. You missed the best part. No, I'm only kidding, but you'll be able to get the slides. Okay, I'm watching the time because I know that we want you to come back to the next two, and you'll only come back if I respect your time. So I'm going to be respectful. Anything else in the chat room that Samantha and Lauren, you think I need to call out?
I'm looking, okay. If you did not have your question asked, I was trying to slide through. If you don't mind, either like maybe unmuting yourself or popping it back in there.
Yeah.
That way we can get to it timely.
Lauren, can you take down the slide so I can see people? Thank you. Oh, right on. I like this much better. Because y'all know I like calling on people. Christine Griffin Leggett, why are you hiding yourself? Kathy Norcott, Charlene Gladney, y'all better, so I can see your faces. Thank you. Oh, look at Wakia. Hi. Thank you all. I like to see people. Thank you, Terry, for showing me your face the whole time. Any other questions for me? I have one for you, and these will be my closing comments. This is a particularly important time in our lives, and our children do not understand fully what is going on. And I think that it is important to have good conversations that cause you to pause and to act. In our pausing, we have to reflect on what can be and not always what is. We must lift our voices on behalf of humanity. And as we lift our voices, great things will come out. This is a great city. This is a great nation that is experiencing the pain of life. I wish every day could be ceremonial, but it's not. But every day can be better for one person at a time. So I challenge you to think about one person. Because if everybody in Greensboro, there are over 200,000 of us, if we helped one person, poverty would be zero. It would be zero. That's what it takes. One person at a time. And so I ask you, however you are finding a way to heal over the 8 minutes and 46 seconds that happened on the streets of Minneapolis, Minnesota, or anything that may have happened to a neighbor or to you, I just ask you to please think about one person you could lend a helping hand to so that their tomorrow is a little bit brighter. And with that, I thank you for your time. I thank you for your attention, and I thank you for your compassion. Have a fabulous rest of the day, and we look forward to seeing you at the next two luncheons. So Samantha and Lauren, take it away.
Thank you so much, Lauren. And thank you so, so much, Michelle, for your words. Thank you for giving us this opportunity to learn more about poverty in Greensboro and some action items we can do. Two of those are, you can join us for our next two sessions. June 11th, June 18th, we have 2 more speakers coming, heading your way. You can visit unitedwaygso.org/learn and join us there. We'll see you next Thursday. Thank you. Thank you so much, Michelle.
Thank you, dear. Okay, bye-bye, everyone.
Bye, guys.
Thank you.
You're welcome. See you later, everyone. Bye. Hey, Natasha.